So in the furious competition among ultra-elite high schools to demonstrate woke bona fides, one institution has come out on top: Brentwood, a plush private school in West Los Angeles. Last summer, its attempt at social media solidarity with the protests badly backfires, sparking a counter-campaign denouncing the school as structurally racist. Brentwood is all too eager to self-flagellate, repenting for its evil ways and handing out a huge contract to an outside anti-racist consultant, which then promptly goes viral for hosting racially segregated parent meetings, mandating white fragility reading sessions for teachers, and replacing classics in the curriculum for modern masterpieces like Latinx, The Quest for a Los Angeles Identity. Wait a minute, I graduated from Brentwood. Class of 2001. I kind of liked it back then in my alpha nerd days. But this is a world defined by some absurd contradictions. You got a school that charges tuition that exceeds the income of the average American family, is also assigning books teaching students that capitalism is a white supremacist conspiracy. Why is it that the trophy wives of Disney executives spending $16 on orca placenta smoothies are the same people hosting white fragility reading groups? You know who's also noticed these tensions? My classmate, Amanda Milius, daughter of John Milius, legendary screenwriter. Right after graduating film school, Amanda does the unthinkable. She goes to work for the Trump campaign, and then the Trump administration. And then she directs an enormously popular documentary on the Russia collusion investigation. Amanda also understands this particular ecology, so we got together to figure out why it is that the elites love woke.
It's an incoherent dance that won't last. Aside from them just admitting that exclusivity is good and that in their world, the gathering of the children of the elites, they can have whatever diversity trainings they want, but at the end of the day, they do not want their children interacting with the riffraff. And the riffraff go to Pali High School, and they don't want that near them. So they want to put on the cloak of pretend diversity and pretend like egalitarianism, and they don't actually want any of that. So now they've made it even more of a hellscape, because now it's as disgusting of an institution of totally messed up people. I mean, my thing was more like it was a place for very mentally harmed people. They might have had a lot of money, but they were like the children of the most neurotic, most narcissistic. Yeah. I mean, their parents were messed up, so of course they're going to be messed up. I mean, they were getting nose jobs when they were 16. Everybody was bulimic. It was like, I was like the only person that was just like, I'm going to wear a funny hat, and that was my big problem. You know what I mean? Like, it was so messed up that now they've added the addition of this woke, like just total craziness to it, that I can't even imagine going there now.
There is this thing though, it's like, these are the people that are that have won the competition of America in a lot of respects, right? If you live in Santa Monica, I say like you were at the end of history. It's like you solved scarcity, right? Yeah. And you just get to walk to the Pacific Ocean and go to 3rd Street Promenade, and it's like beautiful all the time. And yet so many of them are like deeply psychologically broken and dysfunctional. Deeply. Right?
No, I mean, there's this like, odd thing everyone's on medication. And this was back when we went there. Everybody's on antidepressants. Right. I mean, what the hell? What do they have to be depressed about? Like,
I guess because they don't have any.
They have no struggle. They have no actual. Their struggle is all the thing that we talked about. The getting into one of the top 5 schools and all of that, but they're not like, they don't have the socioeconomic pressure on them where it's like an immigrant family that comes here and they're like, oh my God, like I have to go to college because I'll be the first person that ever went to college. It'll be like, no, you're the first person that didn't go to college if you don't get into one of the best schools. Like, it's that weird thing of like catch up, like where it's almost worse to be born. It's not worse, but to be born to like, well-off parents than to have some kind of struggle where you accomplish things, because you're always just trying to get back to where your parents were. Like, how do some of these people live up to the parents that they have? Like, it's actually kind of a strange.
It is, and they're born into like plenty and in surplus, and then they immediately turn around and attack all the institutions that generated that plenty and that surplus. Right? That's that classic thing, because they never had to earn it. They don't realize how hard it is to get it. if you become so insulated that you have no connection at all to the struggles and the suffering of average working people.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
That's what
Your solutions to their problems will not work because you do not understand them, right? Like you actually don't know what ails the black long haul truck driver who lives next to me, just like you don't know what ails the white long haul truck driver that lives next to me.
That's the argument. Is
you think what you need to feed them is diversity, equity, and inclusion, exercise the demons of the racism within you, and that doesn't
help anybody.
At best, it will do nothing. At worst, it will exacerbate and inflame racial tensions, and will bring the end to the most successful multiracial experiment ever in the history of human democratic organization. Right? That's what could potentially happen, or it does nothing. You're actually not helping you're not improving these people's schools. You're not making their neighborhoods any safer. You're not making it easier to have functional nuclear families. Like, you're not doing anything to actually substantially help their lives.
Yeah.
You're just trying to feed them this empty ideology.
That's kind of what I'm getting at when I say that it doesn't matter about this idea of racism in Brentwood or any of these institutions. The point is that they are the elite of the elite, and they're sheltered from what it's like to be working class people. And so if they are going to run our country, and they are going to be the leaders of the United States, whether we like it or not, the fact that they think they can just bless themselves with wokeness and that will make them good people is really dangerous. Because now, at least when we were growing up, they had this idea that they should be a little bit ashamed of their upbringing because it was so privileged. Now they're going to walk around thinking, well, I read all of the, the woke literature, so therefore I'm a good person. I'm fine. It's going to be even worse because imagine like not being able to see that it's a class struggle. It has nothing to do with race. And as we go back to Andrew Breitbart and what the Frankfurt School was trying to do, which is divide the United States amongst fracture lines that they could identify, because the United States was not easily divided among class lines. They didn't have this like working class revolution like they did in Bolshevism and all that. It was all they had to identify the races and genders and any other way they could divide people. That is really dangerous. I mean, that's why, like I said, the best time of my life, the most refreshing times of my life is when I got away from the upper class upbringing that I had and interacted with normal people, whether that was in my social life in high school or when I, volunteered to work on the Trump campaign and hung out with people that were normal families that had never even been to Los Angeles and didn't care what was going on in Los Angeles and worked 2 jobs. I mean, the most heartbreaking thing I dealt with and what I carried with me the whole time I was working in the administration was this one particular woman who worked 2 different truck driving jobs, had all 3 of her kids by herself, and hadn't even taken a day off to like go visit, her aunt when she was ill or whatever, had taken a day off specifically to come knock doors and to do phones on the campaign and to volunteer her time doing that because she believed in America and she believed in what the mission was. I mean, she wasn't able to go move to Washington, D.C. and go work in the administration and like start a new life in D.C. and see what it's like to do politics. I was. So I had to remember this person every time I was doing something in the administration, every time I was doing something in government. I was like, what would these people want me to be doing? And I don't think that, so if these woke schools want to, in my opinion, learn how to actually do good for regular Americans, which you would think is the goal of our ruling class, that's the kind of thing that they should do. They should go spend time with them, and it has nothing to do with their race.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why we become much more, they'll be like hardline old school 70s communists that I'll hear on podcasts that are talking about elite fixation on race is just a way to divide the working class. And I find myself being like, that might be true. I don't know. There's a reason, if someone so readily embraces something that's supposed to be radical, like Black Lives Matter, and they have a lot of power and a lot of money, that should make you question the efficacy of that. It must mean they find it non-threatening in some way.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is basically leads it back to Brentwood and these schools where there's a way in which they can do their white fragility struggle sessions because it doesn't actually threaten their
No.
wealth, their status, their privilege at all. Like, it actually costs them nothing. It's sort of ill-gotten moral superiority.
That's scary.
Which is what I think is most repulsive about it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I have to say also, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't get the sense no one was trying to learn anything from the Trump phenomenon. Even, like, there is no sense of, like, they're still complaining about the fact that he has the tone of an Atlantic City hustler. I'm like, that's what he is.
That's the whole point.
That's fine. I don't particularly like it either. I still subscribe to the New Yorker. It's not the way that I communicate, but, like, there are things to be learned about the policy agenda that he pursued. Mm-hmm. And there's, like, a complete... It's either laziness or self-righteousness or self-satisfaction where they're like, we don't have anything to learn about this.
It's education. I was reading somebody's account the other day and they were like, oh my God, I got stuck next to a Trump car. There was a Trump flag in the car next door or something. And some LA person.
Yeah.
And they were like, these people just have no education. And like all their comments were about like, oh, these people just like our education system is so ruined. And you're like, what? Dude, like
you haven't learned anything.
Like, yeah, it's just incredible. Like I don't know that it's solvable. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
right. But I think it's it's like that kind of self-righteousness and still playing the same goddamn script I heard in December of 2016 about Trump without any evolution in like what it is that he's, and this is maybe somewhat bipartisan phenomenon where there's not particular like among kind of old school Republicans that just want to resurrect Reaganomics. It's like, I don't think Reaganomics is going to fix what ails the communities that are suffering catastrophic declines in life expectancy. Like, I just don't think NAFTA 2.0 is going to cut it, right?
No, and no one's going to accept it anymore. I mean, that's the thing, is that Trump pulled the veil off of all of that. No one's going to accept NAFTA again. No one's going to accept any of this. And that's what these old school conservatives are realizing, is they're being roundly tossed out of the mainstream because Trumpism is the mainstream now.
And then this firm that they hire to do the equity training is, I've unfortunately become intimately familiar with these organisms, which inevitably are run by someone who just desperately wants to give a TED talk, like really wants to be an influencer, always wearing a bow tie, super fancy, but is otherwise like devoid of original ideas, right? So they set up one of these consulting shops and then they exclusively staff it with people that have master's degrees in education studies, which is just what you do.
Yeah, that's so
That's
bad.
the way you monetize an education studies master's degree.
Yeah.
And their job is just to go in there and shower parents with ungrammatical PowerPoint presentations about the oppression demons that are haunting this place.
Also, the thing that's weird is that for the parents, if diversity is the most important thing for your prime special elite children to learn about, then you could send them to uni, you could send them to Pali, you could send them to any number of the public schools in Los Angeles have lots of diversity.
They do, they're just not eager to do that.
I wonder why they don't want to do that.
I know.
It's so weird.
I think there's a spiritual vacuum in a lot of these corridors, and it's a vacuum will not stay a vacuum indefinitely. It needs to be filled by something.
Yeah, and
if there's a desecration, like, and again, technically the majority of the student body is Jewish at Brentwood, but I know what it was like. Like, I went to a dozen bar mitzvahs, but I didn't get the sense that it was mostly about deep spiritual reflection and meditation.
No,
and communion with the spirit. It was an opportunity to display ostentatious wealth.
Yes, right? Do you remember
It's like an arms race, right?
Yes,
in order to have
it was
the
an arms
most,
race.
It's an arms race. So even like your religion is you go to synagogue maybe twice a year, but the rest of it is just pathological materialism, like hyper competition. A lot of these people have made their bones in Hollywood, which is the most brutal of industries, right? So much of the mystique of Hollywood is astonishing rewards for a tiny, tiny bit of people, and then just like despair and failure for everybody else. And the mystique is because those two things operate in such tight partnerships. Like, they can both be on set together.
Yes.
But like everybody knows what the hierarchy is and who sits on top and who's at the bottom.
Like the arms race of the bar mitzvahs and like all of that, and it was totally devoid of any real religion. Like, I didn't even really get into being Jewish until I was like well into my 20s. Like, I just had nothing to do with religion when I was that age.
You need some catechism. You need something to worship.
Well, for a while it was environmentalism. For a while it was
You're right.
like doing your penance with like recycling and like caring about the ocean or whatever. And like that whole thing, like the global warming apocalypse theme. But then now it's the wokeism, which is like even more of the self-flagellation. Like, I was born with the original sin of being white, and like I must make up for this. And that whole craziness, because basically they can't handle the fact that they have just like extreme wealth and extreme
there needs to be some
privilege. They have to, but so they do, instead of like actually doing anything that might be useful to another person, like they do these things to themselves.
Right. We talk a little bit about why it matters if you miseducate the elites. Right?
Yes.
There are consequences.
That's a good point.
That if you have many
they're going to run our country.
Even if you don't want them to.
Yeah, that was a great point.
These people staff up what the orienting institutions of the culture.
Yeah.
They are, for better or worse, again, you're making your kind of insurgent, dissident media production company. We are too. But right now, we do not have the same power over the culture as Viacom, right?
Right.
Like, there's multiple generations of people that there's a very particular way that they've been educated, a particular way that they should think about politics. They go into these powerful institutions and they will tell America the story about itself. And if they've been miseducated or also like horrifically insulated from the lives of the vast majority of Americans, that's going to have consequences.
Totally.
Right? I'm saying I see that now surrounded by, I mean, again, I was part of these little echo chambers. It's like LA, Ivy League school, Washington, D.C. Like, I didn't know it either. But once you break out of that bubble, you really see how these intellectual fetishes and predilections of the elites have absolutely nothing to do with improving the material circumstances of these people. What the elites decide is worth talking about has consequences, because that determines the boundaries of the conversation. And for Trump, again, as someone who's still, like, whatever his flaws, there was certainly a way in which it bursts some of the boundaries on the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what that has to have had an effect on my politics, because the same way that Trump offended the elites now is very similar to how I got a kick out of offending even just going to my own high school.
Right.
Like, there is an element of like the pearl clutching that you want to see, where you're like, no, you deserve to have to be forced to deal with somebody that rejects your entire worldview and rejects the idea that you are elite, and that rejects the idea that you have anything special about you that makes you better than everybody else.
Right.
Like, I rejected that, and, you know, it was like sandpaper the entire time I was in school. But that's kind of the part of my brain that's like this rebellious thing that also enabled me to laugh really hard at most of the things that Trump said that offended people. We certainly could have done better, because there were a lot of people, a lot of political appointees that I really liked that were certainly smarter than I was and better at maneuvering. You know, I kind of did my thing where I just sort of like bump up against something full force and throw a fit and whatever. But there was other people that actually were fairly skilled at maneuvering in the administrative state and in the levers of government. But they were not empowered. And the president's method of, that I think he used a lot in the private sector, of having this team of rivals and then the best ideas rise to the top, that doesn't work in government. You have to all be on the same side and be arguing for the same mission.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, like, I've said this a million times on podcasts or whatever, but like, you know, everybody called him a fascist that demanded loyalty. And that would have been better, because he didn't demand loyalty. He allowed people who outwardly said that they were completely against the agenda, they were allowed to just carry on working in the government with the blessing of being a political appointee, which is totally destructive. I've always said that the harder time that I had, by the time I resigned, I was more upset at the political appointees that were working against the president than the careers, because the careers, they're just doing what they do. Like, of course that's what they're going to do. Like, they believe in a completely different agenda and method for running the country. They believe that they should be in charge and that they have, for some reason, that they have this privilege to decide how things will be in all parts of the government, whether that's foreign policy or economic policy or whatever it is. But the political appointees were just selfishly out for themselves.
Yeah, I never would have worked in government before you told me about what your experience was, and I certainly would never do it now.
But we have to. But this is the thing. I was arguing this at CPAC the other day, is that that's the problem, is that people like you and I and Republicans or right-leaning people or libertarians in general, they say, I don't even like the government. Why would I want to work in it? And that's what I said. When they said, you want to go work in the administration? I was like, no, that's insane. I was like, let me save you the time. There's no way anyone's going to let me do that. But as it was explained to me, it was like, well, no, because you are resistant to this and because you have issues with the way that the government's being run, you ought to go work in the government. Like, because the idea that DC is somehow a bipartisan place is totally not true, because the only people that volunteer to go become career civil servants are Democrats, because they're the ones that believe the government can solve all the problems.
Right.
And so we can't complain that DC is 99% rabid liberal Democrats, because all we want to do is go work on our farm or go start our business or whatever.
Right.
We don't want to go work in the government. And so we can't be surprised when our ruling class is made up of a bunch of like glorified DMV employees.
Yeah.